Dust curled beneath the wheels of the transport as it crawled through the checkpoint, the scorching sun baking every inch of metal. She sat quietly inside, eyes forward, shoulders squared, wearing the same uniform as everyone else, but somehow, she didn't belong. Her name wasn't on the manifest, and that alone was enough to draw eyes. Not just eyes, suspicion. Judgment. Silent accusations wrapped in tight glances and half-hidden sneers. As she stepped down onto the base, boots hitting the cracked desert ground with quiet resolve, a ripple of unease moved through the ranks. A female soldier, unknown, unannounced, and unclaimed by any unit, wasn't just rare. It was a red flag. Whispers started before she even crossed the first perimeter. Who is she? Where did she come from? Why hadn't anyone heard of her? Her insignia marked her as a specialist, but her file wasn't in the system. Not in the local command database. Not in logistics. Nowhere. The young corporal at the gate hesitated when he looked at her ID. It scanned valid, but something didn't feel right. He made a call. Then another. Within minutes, 2 MPs approached her. She was calm. Too calm, maybe. No protest, no panic, just that same focused stare like she'd already lived through worse. She was told to wait near the barracks, not inside. Not yet. Someone needed to figure things out. The longer she waited, the more the doubt around her thickened. Other soldiers gathered at a distance. No one offered water. No one spoke to her. But they watched closely. Every inch of her posture screamed discipline. She didn't slump. She didn't fidget. She stood like someone who knew how to stand, and that made them uneasy too. They didn't know her story, and in this place, unfamiliar stories often meant dangerous ones. A rumor sparked. Maybe she was a translator gone rogue. Someone else guessed she was intel sent to spy on them. Another said her uniform was fake altogether. Theories spiraled like wildfire. She remained silent. Then came the lieutenant, stern, young, trying hard to project authority. He asked where she was transferred from. She gave a code. He didn't recognize it. He asked again. Same code. This time, he scribbled it down and stepped away, speaking urgently into a secure line. The response took minutes. Long ones. And when it came back, it wasn't helpful, no confirmation, just a hold order. She wasn't to be admitted into base protocols. Not until full verification. By now, the murmurs had turned to smirks. A few even laughed out loud, calling her the ghost recruit and Special Ops Barbie. The MPs asked her to open her duffel bag. She did, methodically, without hesitation. Inside was standard issue gear, nothing out of place. Still, that wasn't enough. Another call was made, this time, to the unit commander. The sun was starting to dip low, but the heat still clung to everything like a second skin. She hadn't spoken unless spoken to. She hadn't sat. She hadn't asked questions. That quietness, it unnerved them. When the commander finally arrived, there was tension in the air like static before a lightning strike. He looked her up and down. Not with interest. With calculation. She's not in any of our systems, the lieutenant said flatly. Not even black-level transfers? The commander shook his head. Then stepped forward. You say you're one of us? He asked. She nodded once. Prove it. That's when the demand was made, one she'd heard before, in darker corners of the world. She was told to strip. Not fully, just enough to prove who she really was. Her identity wasn't going to be checked through papers. Not here. Not now. And certainly not gently. She stood in the center of the open lot, the same patch of hard-packed dirt where drills were run and boots were broken in. But this wasn't training. This wasn't routine. This was something different, sharp, ugly, and humiliating. Soldiers lingered at the perimeter, their murmurs loud enough to cut through the heat. A few looked uncomfortable, but most just stared, curious or amused. Some even leaned on fences and jeeps as if this was a show. The lieutenant stepped forward again, voice louder now, emboldened by the eyes around him. He demanded she remove her field jacket. Slowly, without a word, she complied. Her fingers moved with deliberate care, unfastening the buttons one by one, the fabric folding into itself as she pulled it free. Her undershirt clung to her skin, soaked in sweat from hours of waiting under the sun, but she stood tall, back straight, eyes unmoving. The crowd expected her to protest, to question, to resist. But she didn't. And somehow, that only made it worse. The silence made the command feel more violent than it already was. He told her to keep going. They needed to confirm markings, tattoos, scars, anything that might verify her identity or prove she was lying. Her tags weren't enough. Her records couldn't be found. Her calmness wasn't reassurance, it was taken as defiance. The commander watched from behind a Humvee, arms crossed. He said nothing yet. His face was unreadable, but his silence gave permission. The lieutenant took another step forward, now close enough to see the way her knuckles had tightened around the waistband of her fatigues. The request came again, remove them. Not all the way. Just enough to see what was hidden underneath. Just enough to verify that she wasn't who she said she was. Or worse, just enough to humiliate her into cracking. She paused. Not from fear. Not from hesitation. It was something else, something almost ritualistic, like she was preparing herself. Her thumbs hooked under the waistband slowly. The tension in the air spiked. This wasn't about identification anymore. It was about power. About putting her in a place where they could feel superior again. An unknown element on base was dangerous, but a female unknown? That was something they needed to control. Someone laughed from the sidelines. A cruel, ugly sound that echoed louder than it should have. Another voice called out something vulgar, but it was quickly hushed. Not because anyone disagreed, because the officers were watching. Her hands moved, pulling the waistband down just enough to expose her lower abdomen, her skin streaked with dirt and heat. And then it stopped. Gasps. A few staggered steps backward. The crowd's tone changed instantly, from smug to confused, from entertained to stunned. The lieutenant froze, his words caught halfway in his throat. He stared down at the skin revealed beneath the sweat-soaked uniform, and something in his face shifted. Not fear exactly. Recognition, maybe. And disbelief. She said nothing. Someone behind her fumbled a clipboard. It clattered against the ground, ignored. The cipher was inked there, just above her hip bone. Faded. Blurred at the edges. Old. But still distinct enough to be recognized by anyone who'd served in certain corners of the world. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't for rank. It was operational, a black code symbol used only by units that officially didn't exist. Teams that moved through shadows, not bases. Soldiers who weren't listed on any manifest because they weren't supposed to be listed at all. No one reached for their radios. No one barked new orders. For a full 10 seconds, the entire lot fell into an eerie, rigid silence. The kind of silence that said something sacred or dangerous had just been exposed, something too far above their pay grade to question. The shift in atmosphere was sudden, but not everyone caught it. While a few officers had stepped back in stunned silence after seeing the cipher on her waist, the rest of the unit didn't understand what they were looking at. They saw a tattoo, nothing more. An odd marking, sure, but not something that explained her presence or authority. To them, she was still just an intruder in uniform. And intruders, especially ones who didn't speak, who didn't defend themselves, were easy targets. Someone scoffed loudly. It broke the silence like a knife through canvas. Nice ink, a private sneered from the back. Got that at a biker bar, or was it just prison? A few chuckles followed. One soldier spit on the ground, not far from her boot. The heat and tension twisted into something uglier, mockery. The kind that fed on discomfort and turned it into entertainment. She stood still. The waistband of her fatigues remained lowered just enough to expose the cipher, but her expression didn't flicker. Her hands rested calmly by her side. She didn't reach for her jacket. She didn't speak. And somehow, her silence fanned the flames even more. It made them feel like she was above them. Like she wasn't reacting because they weren't worth reacting to. A second voice joined in, this one more aggressive. You think you're too good to talk? You don't answer questions, don't salute, don't even introduce yourself, and we're just supposed to accept that. A murmur of agreement passed through the crowd. They weren't even listening for answers anymore. They wanted a reaction. They wanted cracks. They wanted to see her break. A soldier older, higher ranked than the others, but with a chip on his shoulder, stepped closer. He stared at the cipher on her waist, squinting like he was trying to decode it. You think some ink makes you untouchable? Looks like garbage to me, he muttered. Then louder, to the others, maybe she carved it in herself to look special. Ain't the first time someone forged their way onto a base. Another chimed in, bet it's fake. You can order that stuff online. Temporary, even. A burst of laughter erupted behind him. It wasn't just about her now. It was about their own discomfort, turned into ridicule, like a group of kids picking on the one person they didn't understand. One of the MPs who had escorted her in shifted uncomfortably. He looked toward the commander, but the man still hadn't spoken. Still observing. Still unreadable. The lieutenant, meanwhile, looked like he wanted to speak, but couldn't figure out how. He'd been the one to escalate things, and now he was trapped between continuing what he started or admitting they'd gone too far. She remained motionless. Her eyes flicked across the group once. Just once. It wasn't a glare. It wasn't a plea. It was more like a scan brief, practiced cold. The kind of look someone gave before deciding whether or not the room was a threat. That unsettled some of them more than any words could have. A few shifted their weight, subconsciously adjusting their stance, like their bodies sensed what their minds hadn't yet caught up to. But not all of them got the message. One soldier, clearly emboldened by the crowd, stepped forward with a smirk. Go ahead, he said mockingly. Tell us who you really are. Or is this all part of your little cosplay? You hiding more symbols under there? He reached out, as if to tug further at the waistband of her fatigues. That was the moment the air thickened, and everything in the unit teetered on the edge of something irreversible. Her hand moved before his fingers could make contact. Not fast. Not aggressive. Just firm, calculated. She caught his wrist mid-reach, her grip like iron, eyes locked onto his with a gaze that felt colder than the desert wind at night. It wasn't a struggle. She didn't yank or twist. She didn't speak. She simply held his wrist in place, letting him feel, truly feel, that he had stepped out of line. The mocking grin on his face faltered. For a split second, he saw something behind her calm exterior that made him recoil, not from pain, but from realization. She released him just as slowly. Her hand returned to her side. The cipher still sat there, half visible in the waning light. By now, it had drawn more eyes. A few older soldiers began to look closer. One stepped forward cautiously. His name patch read Ramirez. He'd done a tour in Kandahar back in '09. Another in Yemen. He had seen things, classified things. When his eyes landed on the ink, something shifted in his expression. His jaw tightened, and without a word, he backed up a step. Not in fear. In respect. Someone noticed. What? You recognize that? Another soldier asked him. Ramirez didn't answer. He just nodded faintly, then glanced at the commander. That was enough for the tone to shift again. It was Ramirez's reaction that finally broke the spell of mockery that had hung over the group. One by one, the younger soldiers looked again, really looked at the cipher. It wasn't artistic. It wasn't stylish. It wasn't even complete, as if parts of it had faded with time or been seared off during recovery. But it wasn't fake. It wasn't something you bought online or printed from a catalog. It was crude, raw, burned in with purpose. The symbol was small, but unmistakable to those who knew. A Black Ops cipher tied to operations buried so deep in redacted files they might as well not exist. The kind of unit that didn't issue name tags. The kind of mission that came with no return ticket. And worse, One they didn't brief you about unless you were part of it. The commander finally moved. Slow, deliberate steps. He approached her in silence, eyes fixed on the cipher. Every step brought with it a heavier stillness. He stopped just a few feet away, lowering his voice. That symbol, where did you get it? The question wasn't meant to be answered. It was a formality. He already knew. You didn't see that cipher unless you were either the one carrying it or the one left behind to count the losses. Her eyes met his level unshaken. She didn't blink. The commander drew in a breath and turned to the lieutenant. His voice was sharper now. You ordered her to strip? The lieutenant hesitated. Sir, she had no clearance. No file. No, that symbol isn't in the file system. He cut off, clearly rattled now. The commander didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His tone said enough. The other soldiers around them fell into an uneasy hush. No one spoke. No one moved. Then the commander turned back to her. For a long moment, he just looked at the cipher. Then at her eyes. Then back again. There was no question left in him, just understanding. And something else. Something heavier. Something like guilt. Behind them, the wind kicked up a cloud of sand across the open lot, brushing past boots and gear like a ghost passing through. The only thing left untouched was the silence now hanging around the group. Heavy. Unspoken. A silence built not from confusion anymore, but recognition. The silence that settled after the commander's words was thick, tense enough to stretch across the entire compound. No one dared interrupt. No more laughter. No more taunts. Even the ones who had been most vocal earlier now kept their heads low, suddenly aware that they might have crossed a line they didn't even know existed. The wind carried dust through the open lot, swirling quietly around boots and crates, and the shame beginning to settle into the bones of those who had watched with amusement. The commander took another slow step forward, then crouched slightly so he could look closer at the marking on her waist. He didn't touch it. He didn't ask to. He didn't need to. His eyes lingered there, scanning every faded angle of the cipher as if reconfirming a memory long buried. There was no mistake. This wasn't a replica. This wasn't stolen or fabricated. This was real. He stood up, eyes still fixed on her face now. Her expression hadn't changed. Not once. Not when they questioned her. Not when they ordered her to undress. Not even when they mocked her. And certainly not now, in the dead center of this strange reversal. Her stillness wasn't just strength, it was discipline forged somewhere far beyond the space's jurisdiction. The kind of composure that didn't just survive war, it belonged to it. Where were you last assigned? The commander finally asked, his voice lower now, no longer commanding, but respectful. The kind of tone you use when speaking to someone you realize outranks you in ways that don't appear on any chart. She gave a series of numbers, nothing that matched any current unit on base. But that wasn't surprising. The commander nodded slowly, as if confirming something only he understood. There was history in his eyes now. Recognition. Regret. Behind him, the lieutenant stood frozen, his clipboard hanging limply at his side. The smugness that had once shaped his posture was gone, replaced by unease. His mind was spinning, trying to reprocess everything he thought he knew about her, about this moment, about the unit he was part of. And how wrong he had been. The soldiers around them began whispering again, but this time it wasn't the same. No jokes. No insults. Only hushed questions. One voice asked what the cipher meant. Another wondered aloud if she was from a disbanded task force, a deep cover-up, or something else entirely. None of them had answers. None dared to ask her directly. One of the younger privates, the same one who had joked earlier, took a cautious step backward. His face was pale now, all color drained. He had laughed. He had cheered. He had nearly watched her stripped in front of an entire base like some criminal. And now he realized he might have been mocking a legend. Or worse, someone who had seen and done things his mind couldn't begin to imagine. She remained still. She hadn't spoken more than a handful of words since she arrived, and yet she'd unraveled the room completely. Power had shifted. The base was no longer evaluating her, they were being evaluated. Judged. Weighed. The commander finally broke his gaze and looked at the MPs who'd escorted her in. "Get her gear," he said. "Now. And make sure it's secure." One of them hesitated. "Where should we take it, sir?" The commander looked over the lot, then back to her, then to the barracks. "Wherever she wants." The MPs nodded and moved quickly, more aware than ever of the quiet authority this unknown soldier held. The Cipher had done what her voice never needed to. It had spoken for her, asserted her identity. Not as an intruder or an imposter, but as someone who had walked darker paths, whose silence carried more weight than any threat. They watched her as she gathered her jacket, the same one they'd made her remove just hours before. But now there was no mockery, no barking orders, no suspicious glares. Just a quiet, uneasy respect, the kind that settles in once people realize they've mistaken someone exceptional for someone expendable. She moved with the same calm control as before, no hurry, no show of vindication. Just precise, measured actions that came from years of drilled muscle memory. Word had already spread beyond the lot. By the time she stepped toward the command center, more soldiers had come out, pretending to be doing something else, but all of them watching her. Eyes followed her like she was a shadow stepping through daylight, out of place, but impossible to ignore. Some whispered again, but now it wasn't ridicule. It was wonder. Uncertainty. Fear, maybe. They were trying to place her, trying to make sense of the Cipher, of the commander's sudden change in tone, of the way everything seemed to have pivoted around her without warning. She passed a wall lined with unit patches, every squad that had ever cycled through this remote outpost. Her eyes scanned them briefly, pausing at one, barely noticeable, nearly faded from the sun. It had no motto. Just a black triangle with a single, diagonal line slashed across the center. No one had spoken about that patch in years. Half the current personnel didn't even know what it meant. But the few who did watched her face as she looked at it, and they saw it. That flicker. That subtle shift in her jawline. Not emotion. Just memory. Inside the operations tent, the commander waited. His demeanor was different now. Shoulders squared, but not stiff. The weight of recognition clung to him. A man used to being in control, now humbled in the presence of something that had once been classified even above his own access. He motioned her in with a nod. No salute. No orders. Just acknowledgement. "Back then," he said quietly, "they told us your unit never existed." She said nothing. She didn't need to. The commander sat down slowly, like the air had grown heavier. He glanced at the folders in front of him, useless, really. Nothing in them could explain what he now knew to be true. Her presence was a hole in the record, a gap where an entire operation had once lived and then vanished, scrubbed clean. But some things couldn't be erased. Not marks like the Cipher. Not eyes like hers. She placed a single item on the table, a coin. Old, tarnished, with a symbol etched into it that matched the Cipher on her skin. He picked it up, turned it over, and inhaled sharply. Challenge coin. Not military issue. Something rarer. He looked up again, slower this time. The weight in his eyes was clear. Remorse. Respect. And something else, maybe guilt for what had almost happened in that lot. They both knew what the coin meant. Where it came from. Who had to die for it to be earned. Behind them, footsteps approached. The lieutenant entered, stiff-backed, still trying to save face. He glanced between the two of them, clearly unsure how to carry himself now. Whatever assumptions he'd had, whatever power he thought he wielded, gone. The commander turned to him. "This soldier," the commander said, motioning toward her without breaking eye contact, "will have full clearance moving forward. Any questions about her presence, any questions, come directly to me." The lieutenant nodded once, then left without a word. She stood quietly as the room settled again. The silence was no longer one of suspicion, but reverence. Whatever else the people on this base thought of her, one thing was now undeniable. She wasn't a mistake, or a mistake in the system. She was something the system had once built, then tried to forget. And now she was back, standing in the open, unmasked, unwelcomed, but no longer unseen.